My name is Don McKinnon, I think, and this is small town talk, something of that nature anyway. What you find out is that every city and town has something in common. I've commented on it in prior broadcasts. I compare it to a puzzle, and there are pieces of the puzzle that create the town or the city. Sometimes you find that a city has a reputation of crime, let's say, or sometimes you find out it has a reputation of people who come like down the Cape for vacation, certain communities. So each town, city has a little bit of an identification. In some cases it doesn't even know how it got it, but it has it. And so therefore these pieces of the puzzle come into the communities by virtue of people often not of the community. And so I'm going to give you just a little bit of the jargon, excuse my old teacher methods. The question is, does the rule of the many overrule that of the few? Or does the rule of the few overrule that of the many? And what I've just given you basically is the bones of government. That government sets up certain rules. You've got to obey those rules or you've got a problem. How bad is your problem? It depends upon how far you go awry. For example, sometimes in a liquor license, it's good until 10 o'clock and you open until midnight or 1 o'clock, and now you have a problem. You pay the fine, you come back, and I'm giving you the bad example of licenses now. And then there's a fight breaks out, and suddenly your restaurant or lounge has the reputation of a problem, and the community comes in and tries to resolve it. What we tried to do in the town of Raynham, I'll stay just to that for a minute. There's multitude of issues, of course. What we try to do in the town of Raynham is take a location that, say, should be residential, and then really that place shouldn't be operating after 10 o'clock. Now, if you're going to buy a business, you're going to say, well, I want to open until midnight, I want to open until 1 o'clock. That's for you to say. And then it's up to the licensing authority trying to keep it so that you can't open until midnight or 1 o'clock. It's a question of I'll use the word quickly and then get away from it because people don't like it. Power. Who's got the most power? Have you, as what we call the applicant, or has the town, that is those who set up the rules? So when you go to different cities and towns, you go before different boards. And Raynham is no different than that. We have our planning board, we have our board of appeals, we have our board of health, we have our could be a multitude of different conservation issues that occur. And so that is how you set up the structure in the town of Raynham. I'm not going to put you to sleep, I hope. I'm going to give you some of the things that I've listed over the period of years I've kept, and I'm not going to try to show these to you, but I've got files from different events that occurred. I was a selectman for 39 years in the town until 2012. So for the last 6 or 7 years, I've been working either with different boards or having different cable television shows, sometimes alone, sometimes with a partner. And so these are the events as I wrote them down on a given day. Who knows why? First is the Borden Colony. You probably know where that is, don't you? The next is Gilmore Hall. You may or may not know where that is. The next is the Water, North, and Center districts. You're in one or the other. The next is the Jordan Marsh site. Depending on your age, it will depend upon whether that word means anything to you at all. I'm not going to try to stop and describe each one of them, because if I do that, that's the end of the broadcast. The next would be a restaurant called place for steak, and the next would be a restaurant called Sambo's. After that would be what's called the School Bus Law. After that would be, and this is the name of a restaurant, you baseball fans don't get upset, Squeeze Play. And then the next is Gravel Removal, which are those pits where they go, and I think in prior broadcast I mentioned that because that's where I started around the town, where there was an excess of abandoned gravel pits. The next I've got is the mobile home park, and we will talk in depth about that. The one that will probably take the most, and probably a full broadcast on its own, depending on how the moon is called BR High School. Well, really now it's Bridgewater Raynham School System. And when I moved to town, people were just graduating from a school called Taunton High School. Then became overcrowded, and we entered into a partnership with the town of Raynham with a town called Bridgewater, next town over. At that time, the population of Raynham was probably 5,000. I float that number about because it could have been 6, could have been 4. And the population of Bridgewater was probably 18,000. Well, today the population of Raynham is really about 15,000. And the population of Bridgewater is closer to 30,000. The next will be the 3 small schools. I'm talking to you from one of them. This is called the South School. Then the next is the K-12 systems. And what happened was, after a period of time, a citizen group moved, and successfully, I opposed it, but moved successfully to go kindergarten through 12, Bridgewater Raynham Regional System. I will expound on that to the point that I'll put you to sleep. The next is the sewer system. Now, the sewer system and the water system are type of utilities. And what that means is that what they will do is offer you the supply that in your lot in the old days, you obtained that on your own system. Going way back, of course, it's what they used to call the outhouse. I think probably, you'd be surprised at this, and I'll give you an estimate. In around 15 to 20% of China still has outhouses. That will surprise you, because I will, in later broadcasts, expound on the fact that the number one competitor to the United States is the country of China. And if that's so, how come they still have outhouses? And the answer to that, I'll give it to you very quickly, is because when I first moved to Raynham, we had the we's and the they's, those that belonged and those that did not. And China is too big to take care of itself. It overwhelms itself. So therefore, they have a population equal to the United States of America within itself. And therefore, they have probably another population equaling the United States of America. So therefore, with their industrial power and their brilliant people, they therefore compete with us with the industrial nation, which is probably the same size as we are, maybe a little bit bigger. The next is on a police report, which I think I might get to today. I think I will, because I'm somewhat going by years in the town of Raynham. And the name is John McKinnon, Kennon. John, his spouse, have passed. And but at that time, John worked in a city called Fall River, I believe. And he was an officer for the police department in Fall River, and I more or less drafted him to come up to the town of Raynham because he would do it for us, and because he was a citizen of the town of Raynham, and I will get into that in the future. The first pile I'm pulling out here, you're going to see this, you'll say, well, what is this anyway? And what I'm taking out in these files will be part of a broadcast almost by itself, in some cases, the issue. For example, this is the youth police problem, and it was in December of 1973. So are we going back a bit? I think so. And at that time, John McKinnon was a educated, in a fashion, officer in Fall River. And I believe it's Fall River. If it's New Bedford, I get those towns mixed up. I know you do too. Unless you come from Fall River and New Bedford. If that's the case, you are justifiably offended. So what happened is John McKinnon and I, when I was just recently in 73 elected, got together and started to talk about juvenile situations. They were not out of control. It is not that juvenile situations in the town of Raynham were such that they were changing the character of the town of Raynham. But I've told you before, and I will reiterate this as time goes by, different towns have what they consider their strength, and they stay with that, and then other things become other. So Raynham has always been, and therefore now, 2019, hasn't changed. Raynham is pro-education, and before I came to this town, the town of Raynham was working for it, and there was no K. There was no kindergarten in those days. You know, you went private if you wanted kindergarten. So it was grade 1 through 8 or 7. And therefore, that would be the Raynham school system. After that, the students either went to Taunton originally, till we outgrew Taunton, or Taunton outgrew us. And then when that happened, then we had to look about, and with the help of people like Bob Newton and people like that, they merged, meaning Raynham merged with a town called Bridgewater, and that was high school. The high school numbers to replace the high school numbers that were in the city of Taunton. So when we merged to that community, we had a separate entity, and as I say, that in itself will be a broadcast probably when I get into education. But I just wanted to separate the point that there was a youth issue that was occurring in the town of Raynham. Now, back in those days, your fire department was pretty much call fire. Your police department was pretty much part-time police. So as a result, you didn't have specialization as you do today. Today, of course, your ambulance service is every bit as powerful as your police, and that's the fire force. And in Raynham, in the police department, you have different specialty departments in the town of Raynham. Paul Jordan, Lou Pacheco, were considered one of the top detectives in the Commonwealth of Mass. And as they formed a department within the department, they began to be able to face issues that was second to none in their ability to do it. Well, there was a problem with youth. Now, the problem with youth is, of course, that youth doesn't have a representation. It doesn't vote. And so, therefore, if there be an issue with youth, you need an advocate, entering John McKinnon. And John McKinnon, which we did a show in the old days on John, and I've given it the tape to his family, which they were very glad to receive that. John McKinnon came into the town of Raynham and wished to take over the issue. It was very complicated at the time because the town of Raynham Police Department didn't have a budget for its youth situation. So John came in as a volunteer to do that. And he was eventually, through various methods of political power struggles, I suppose you'd call it, eventually John became, and there are those who may say they were the first juvenile officer. John McKinnon was the first juvenile officer, and at a given time, we will take that over. Now, those who say he was not the first juvenile officer may point to someone else, and they may How often does it happen in your life when there's two correct answers? I used to try that. That's way to get a D. So, but yes, there was a full-time juvenile officer who justifiably could say they were the full-time, because John McKinnon was really never on the payroll, and so therefore what he did by his ability, his training that he had in another community, and his volunteering to do it in the town of Raynham. So no disrespect to John in the big picture, but he was the one who instituted the youth police resolve or juvenile officer in the town of Raynham. The time will come when we'll go over that as to how this was done. There are two types of licenses, of course, that you deal with in restaurants. If they have a full alcohol license, that's one type of issue. If they are strictly a restaurant, that's another type of issue, and that's what you call the Board of Health. In the town of Raynham, the Board of Selectmen is also the Board of Health. Will the time come when it's separated? Could be. Should it be? Depends on where your point of view is. But the reason I've always been in favor of the Board of Health staying with the town of Raynham is that when you go to a community that has a separate Board of Health, they're a department which in a way is conflicting with many issues in the executive branch, which is either the mayor or the Board of Selectmen. And so if you keep the Board of Health in the executive branch of government, which means with the selectmen, they're the same people, then often you'll find that the Board of Health is able to do things which normally they might not be able to do, because power rests with the Board of Selectmen and laws are written and things of this nature. So in reality, it is to the town's advantage that licenses, Board of Health, are issued in the office of the Board of Selectmen. Are they wearing two hats? Yes. Does anyone wearing two hats look funny? Yes, they do. But that's just the way it is. And as a result of that, I've taken out Sambo, which is the first one, and there was quite a bit written about this. And I will say to you that the irony of town government is that it capsules problems that are city, but they're not, state, they're not, and federal, they're not. By that I mean Sambo's was a restaurant that came in conflict with the African American community in the United States. And when they went to open this restaurant in a little town called Raynham, it created a problem, and we will go into that. If I start to do it now, it'll be the end of everything else. But I will tell you that many times, well, quite a few times, I was litigated against, but I would say the irony of the situation, I've never gone to a trial with juries and things of this nature. I have been deposed. I have gone to preliminary type hearings with judges and lawyers on both sides, and etc. like that. And I'm not telling you that just to tell you. I'm telling you that because very seldom was I called upon to go to court while representing the Board of Selectmen. Generally speaking, there are two issues that really put people in the executive branch before a judge and some learned attorneys and all. And one of them is, of course, the Board of Health issues. So that is something which is, in a way I alluded to it previously, hours that they're open, the quality of their food. So there are things which they have to answer to the Board of Health. And so I would be, and when I say I'm talking about selectmen. There are 3 selectmen in the town of Raynham. Selectmen basically in towns are 3 members, 5 members, and 7 members. The problem with 7 members is that most of the time you're having a special election because 7 members just don't stay on board that much, and they feel sort of left out because there's 1 or 2 people basically that run a community, and as a result of that, selectmen number 6 and 7 really don't have much to do, and they get bored and they want to stay home. So 7 isn't a number that is recommended at all. So what is the average number of selectmen in towns? 3 and 5. Now, you say, well, 2 can get together and run a 3-person board, and 3 can get together and run a 5-person board. You're absolutely correct. That would create a majority. And so, therefore, there's a play on the power aspect of any board you go on. But on selectmen, it's a little more delicate, if you will, because people have to work together. Generally speaking, the term for a selectman is 3 years. So whatever person you're sitting next to now, that person's got a 3-year term. And so it's good you can get along. I'm not bragging about it, but I don't remember ever having a real bad time with any of the 7. Later on, I did a TV show called Agree to Disagree, and we did disagree, and times we agreed. But it's never been to the point where it's been where you get upset with each other. And all of this is part of the show. This is what it is to tell you what a small town is like. Well, to get back to little old Sambo's, here was a small restaurant, by the way. To get back to Sambo's, the people were marching on the board of license. In this case, we were the licensing authority. See, here's a 3rd hat. Imagine how silly you look with 2. Well, we're also the licensing authority, and in cities it would be somebody else. But there we are, and that was a community of African-American people marching on us. And if you're going to say why, well, you just have to stay tuned for some future broadcast. When I tell you these things, what I want you to understand is that you have to understand not only the issues, which I will explain to you, the old teacher in me just keeps doing that, but also you have to take into account the times. My father, you got your thinking cap on now, was born in 1895. My father worked in a financial district for a time of Boston, a city called Boston. At times he'd go up in the elevator with a young man named Joseph Kennedy, the elder. And they would have to walk down the street in Boston to get to their place of employment. And they would go by various stores. And I think you know where I'm going with this, don't you? Yes. Keep it to yourself. Who need not apply? Can you imagine now, in 2019, going into a help wanted place, and on that place, though, your name is Willie McGillicuddy, say, you know, and the sign outside said, "Help wanted, Willie McGillicuddy need not apply." Well, you'd say, "Oh, what in the world's going on?" So when I give you the years, that's the reason I'm giving you the years. See, you find out that there is a difference in what was going on in those communities when my father and Joseph Kennedy were young men. Now, what am I doing entering the name of Joseph Kennedy is the fact that in later years my father was blue collar. He had to go to work at a very early age, and the old Irish-Scotch families, at a certain age, certain people in the family went off and went to work to help the family financially. And my father was lifted from school to go to work, and he brought his paycheck home and put it into the family. And one of my uncles became an attorney and a graduate, and that is because of the fact he was the younger one, and they had saved their money for him to go. Well, why Joe Kennedy entered into this? Joe Kennedy, and if you study the Kennedys close enough, you're used to them down in Hyannis, aren't you? You're not used to them out in Brookline and Boston and things of that nature. Now, the reason for that was Hyannis was their summer house. And but where did the Kennedys actually live? Bobby Kennedy was senator from New York. The Kennedys came from, if you study it, they won't let you know that, see, because they don't want you to think, I mean, I'm talking public relation-wise, they don't want you to think they're New York people, but they are. And Joe Kennedy moved to New York, and at the time he said it, I'm tired of going to work in the morning and walking by those signs that say, Irish need not apply. Is the Kennedy Irish? You know, and the old saying was, is the Pope Catholic, you know? Yes, the Kennedys were Irish, and yes, that's... And here is one of the most brilliant, which the elder Kennedy was, one of the most brilliant scholars on finances in the history of the United States of America. Remember how much money this man eventually accumulated because of his ability to handle money. Politically, he wasn't that good. His wife, Rose, whose father was the mayor of the city, which Fitzgerald, Honey Fitz was her father, who was the mayor of Boston in the old days. Rose was the one who understood politics. Joe didn't know what was going on. As a matter of fact, the more he talked, the more trouble he got into. That's another story, and I do get off, don't I? Yes, you say he's getting off again. So Joe Kennedy moved to New York. And when he moved to New York, therefore, it was to get away from that sign. I'll give you something else. You young Catholics may take offense when I say this, but lighten up. They used to say, and I'm a Roman Catholic, so you know, they used to say, the Catholics have guns in the cellar of the church. You know, you see those old churches in those days? Well, there are people in the United States who believed this wasn't just, they believed there were guns in the cellar of that church. I, being the way I am and the way I talk, I would verify that for them. I said, I've seen those guns. Those guns are down in the cellar. Some of them are repeat rifles. So watch it. And it's just because of the fact that times change. So now, where are we at this time? We're up to a year called 1980. Now, to an old person like me, that doesn't sound like it's too long ago. And what it is, and I will go into this in more detail with other folders. What this is what we call the Jordan Marsh site. I'm going to tell you right quickly because we got 1 minute. Jordan Marsh was a retail store, most of you know this, was a retail store basically in the city of Boston. Jordan Marsh, Filene's, Gilchrist, they were in the main heart of Boston, they were stores. And a fellow named Mitten, which I will go into at a time, bought like 300 to 500 acres in the middle of a town called Raynham, and that was to be for his, what would have been the original mall, until they did a study of the income in the area, and the income wouldn't do it. So it became abandoned property. They call it land banking. And so as a result of that, it became a piece of property that no one really wanted. Mitten didn't want it anymore. Well, he did, but the trustees got him away from that. And so therefore there was talk of putting a hazardous waste site right in the middle of the town of Raynham. Well, I'll tell you in one of the future broadcasts what's there now, because 80% of you watching know what is that site at this particular time. And Margot and I are within a 2-minute ride of what was supposed to be a hazardous waste in the year 1980. Thank you very much for broadcasting out of the South School today, Margot. I appreciate it. And she's our go-to person. And we will talk to you in what you call another week. Thank you for listening.